Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Shaykh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Maulana Sarfaraz.
Jazakallah for affording us the time with us this morning. I want to begin with something perhaps that introduces the topic. When I had the opportunity to meet you 2 weeks ago, I said to you that I had a particular understanding of something and I wasn't sure how I developed that understanding. And I think it's something that I learned from you, from listening to you. And you said to me, I'm very disappointed in you because you don't take what I say, you think for yourself and you come to your conclusion. I can merely give you and guide you, and you have to think for yourself. And that really struck me as such a profound and important thing for us to start our listeners, because what we say now going forward will be something that you always say is an interpretation, it's your view, but everybody needs to think for themselves when it comes to these things.
That's right. We need to think, and Allah sent the Qur'an لِقَوْمِ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ, to people who think. But it is more than that. He condemns with very, very harsh language. He condemns those who don't think. بَعْدَ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ إِنَّ الشَّرَّ الدَّوَّابِ, the worst people عند Allah, in the sight of Allah, سُمُّ الْبُكْمُ الَّذِينَ لَا يَعْقِلُونَ, the deaf and the dumb who don't think.
Okay, so I think that gives our listeners a good introduction that what we're about to speak about, you need to think and analyze and research for yourself as well. But we have a scholar that is 84 lunar years, as he would always highlight, 84 lunar years, and spent many years, perhaps 40, if not more, 50, 60, 70 years of that time studying the deen and more specifically Islamic eschatology. Those who don't know, eschatology is the study of the end of times and the end of the world. That's just in a nutshell. Maybe, Shaykh, have I encapsulated that correctly?
Yes, eschatology is the study of the end time.
The end times. And one of the things that many of the listeners requested that we speak about was one of the signs that will happen towards the end of time, and that is the coming of Ya'juj and Ma'juj. And before understanding what we want to know about Ya'juj and Ma'juj, I think, Shaykh, can you give us, from your research and understanding, the chronology of things that happen around in that time with the coming of Nabi Isa, the Ya'juj and Ma'juj, all those kind of things. Just a brief summary of that.
The companions of the Prophet, some of them were sitting talking amongst themselves when he passed by, and he asked, "What are you talking about?" And they said, "We are discussing the alamat as-sa'a, the signs of the last day." He then replied, and this hadith is in Sahih Muslim, that the last day would not come, and then he mentioned 10 signs. And these are sometimes referred to as the major signs. I don't agree with that. I think they're all major signs. Many which are not mentioned in this 10 are supremely important signs. Number one, and they're not given in the chronological sequence in which they will occur. No. Number one is Dajjal, the false Messiah. And I have written several books already on this subject, but there are many, many more to be written, and that work will have to be done by those who come after me. Number two is Gog and Magog. Ya'juj and Ma'juj are the terms in Arabic in the Qur'an, but in the Torah and the Gospel, they're referred to as Gog and Magog. Number three is the return of the son of Maryam, Nabi Isa alayhi salam, that he came and he left and he'll come back. Number four is Dukhan, or smoke. Number five is Dabbatul Ard, or the creature of the earth. Number six is the sun will rise from the west, and number 7, 8, and 9 are 3 earthquakes. But these are earthquakes in which the earth will open and swallow what it swallows. And one will be in the east, one will be in the west, and the third one will be in Arabia. And number 10, that a fire will come out of Yemen and will drive people to the place of assembly for judgment and for punishment. These are 10 major signs. And already we can see that the sign of Dajjal is here with us. He's not here as yet in person, but the shadow is here. And the Qur'an warns us about a shadow which will come and which will be comprised of 3 parts. Intaliku ila zillin zi salasi shu'ab. We interpret the Qur'an to say that the shadow is Dajjal. No one, just no one has the authority to prevent us from interpreting the Qur'an. No one can interpret the Qur'an with authority. None. No matter who you are. Because only Allah can confirm that an interpretation is correct. So we have the right, which they cannot deny us, to interpret the Qur'an. But when we interpret the Qur'an, we must always say, Allah knows best, because we can be right or we can be wrong. However, if anyone interprets the Qur'an correctly, then that becomes truth. And you cannot demolish truth, not even with a bulldozer, so don't bother to try. Once it is a correct interpretation, it will survive. And if it is a wrong interpretation, as I have made mistakes in the past, you still get blessings for having made the effort. But tomorrow that will go down the river of no return and be forgotten.
It reminds me of when the ayah of the Qur'an was revealed about the black thread and the white thread fasting, and one of the Sahaba actually went to sleep and put a black thread and white thread under his pillow to be able to distinguish between the two. And the Prophet ﷺ never reprimanded him for his interpretation of that verse of the Qur'an. So you so correctly say this, and it's so important for us not to want to shun other people's views or their interpretations of the Qur'an. But Shaykh, when it comes to the issue of Ya'juj and Ma'juj, much of what we have learned through the madrasas or the institutions or people's, whether it's from Israeliyat, whether it's from people's interpretation, and they also were entitled to make their own interpretation, perhaps in the times that they lived in, and then they've passed those interpretations down, and people have mixed it, and most of our people don't know the difference between Qur'an, actual Hadith, and what people just added in along the way, whether it was your madrasa teacher or your whoever. But we find that the understanding that has come is that Ya'juj and Ma'juj are something that we will definitely be able to know it when it's here. And the Qur'an makes it clear that it is Bani Adam. They are human beings. But Shaykh, how do we bring people to a common understanding or interpretation of what Ya'juj and Ma'juj are, and what are we meant to look out for? Are we meant to look out for anything when it comes to Ya'juj and Ma'juj? Are we supposed to seek out to know who they are so that we can protect ourselves?
Well, first of all, this is a subject of more than simply passing importance. This is a subject of absolutely supreme importance, so we don't want to make mistakes and then live to regret our mistakes. There are 4 hadiths in Sahih Bukhari about Gog and Magog in the end time. on Judgment Day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will speak to Adam alayhi salam and ask him to take out the people for the hellfire. That alone is sufficient to warn us that there's something supremely important here, that he should ask Adam alayhi salam to take out the people for the hellfire. And then Adam alayhi salam would ask, how many are they, O Allah? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would say, excuse me, out of every 1,000, take 999 for the hellfire. And the companions of the Prophet ﷺ were terrified when they heard that. But today nobody bothers. They hear that and they still eat their biryani and go home and sleep. But the companions were terrified. And he smiled. And he said to them, the one for Jannah will be from you, meaning someone who follows the truth which has come from Allah. That's the meaning, from you. And the 999 would all be the people of Gog and Magog. And therefore this is a subject of absolutely supreme importance. The next thing we need to consider when studying this subject is as if the subject is located in the Qur'an, then it follows for people who have right thinking, and most of us no longer have that right thinking anymore. We've been so brainwashed over the centuries. People who think properly, if the subject is located in the Qur'an, then that is the place you will go to begin your study of the subject. Proper methodology is that you first study the subject in the Qur'an. Why? Because Allah says of the Qur'an, وَإِنَّهُ لَحَقُّ الْيَقِينِ, that absolute truth is in the Qur'an. Absolute truth is not located anywhere else. But my critics don't seem to understand that. And no matter what I say, it makes no difference. Absolute truth is located in the Qur'an. And therefore it is to the Qur'an you must go to study the subject, because Allah speaks about Gog and Magog in the Qur'an. And when you go to the Qur'an, there is a way to study the Qur'an. Allah did not divide the Qur'an into surahs for the purpose of study, but they don't know that. And so they study the Qur'an this way. You begin to study Surah Al-Fatiha, and then you study Surah Al-Baqarah, and go on like that. That is not the way to study the Qur'an. Wrong. That is the way to recite the Qur'an. And Allah tells us in the Qur'an, in Surah Al-Isra, Qur'anan faraknahu, I have separated this Qur'an litakrahu, for the purpose of recitation, not for study. The way to study the Qur'an is told excuse me, in Surah Al-Waqi'ah, فَلَا أُقْسِمُ بِمَوَاقِعِ النُّجُومِ إِلَى آخِرِ الْآيَةِ, that you must study the Qur'an the way you study the stars to see the connection between verses. So you must go to the Qur'an first, locate all the verses of the Qur'an on Gog and Magog, and locate how they are connected with each other. And when you do that, you look for patterns in the sky to be able to read the stars, to be able to locate direction. Similarly, you have to learn to locate what Maulana, my teacher, blessed memory, Maulana Dr. Muhammad Fadlur Rahman Ansari, Rahimahullah, who was a supreme scholar of his age, mashallah. He says you must look for the system of meaning of the subject in the Qur'an. And only after that will you go to the Hadith. And now listen carefully, Maulana Safraz. If a Hadith is in harmony with the Qur'an, then we accept it. But what do you do when a hadith is in conflict with the Qur'an? My critics are not prepared to accept that a hadith can be in conflict with the Qur'an. No. Once it is in Sahih Bukhari or Sahih Muslim, it is absolute truth for my critics. And when I point out that this hadith is in conflict with the Qur'an, they call me controversial. What can I do with people who have lost the capacity to think and lost the capacity to recognize that Allah sent the Qur'an to function as Al-Furqan, that which sits in judgment over the hadith? They cannot accept, Sarfaraz, they cannot accept that the Qur'an can sit in judgment over the hadith. This is the lamentable, pathetic state of Islamic scholarship, most of Islamic scholarship today. They're not prepared to accept that the Qur'an can sit in judgment over the hadith. We need a new generation of scholars of Islam.
But at our Shaykh, at our institutions, when we study usul al-fiqh and those things, we are taught of the sources and the prominence of one source over another source, and we are always taught that the Qur'an takes precedence over everything else.
Good, fine. Well, then how do we explain the fact that you could hardly ever find a single scholar of Islam or a single Darul Uloom today which is prepared to accept that this hadith is in conflict with the Qur'an, that our Prophet, Allah's blessing be upon him, married a child? Did you hear that, Khadija? Did you hear that?
The hadith?
Our Prophet married a child.
When it comes to Lady Aisha.
6 years of age. Did you hear that?
I've heard that.
You heard it?
And I've heard alternate views in as far as that is
No. There are no alternate views. This is black and white in Sahih Bukhari, in Sahih Muslim. Sarfaraz will tell you. And that he married a child 6 years of age. And this was not something that Allah said is exclusive for you. There is no evidence of that. None. And therefore, if he is the model, we have to follow his model, then marrying a 6-year-old is a sunnah. They cannot refute me. Don't bother to try. The marrying a 6-year-old will be the sunnah. First of all, this is in conflict with elementary common sense.
Of course.
That's all you need, a little bit of common sense. But because they accept that the hadith and Sahih Bukhari has a status like the Qur'an of absolute truth, they are not prepared to even examine the possibility that the hadith is in conflict with the Qur'an. And therefore we face this tremendous difficulty. And when I point out and I give the evidence that this hadith is not only in conflict with the Qur'an, and I can provide the evidence, but more than that, if it is a sunnah of the Prophet, how come nobody wants to follow that sunnah? You cannot find a single person in 1,400 years of our history who was prepared to marry a 6-year-old child. And no one will give his daughter 6 years of age. But yet they are adamantly accepting that hadith is valid. What can you do, Maulana Sarfaraz, with the people who are betraying the Qur'an? They don't have proper methodology. And this is the problem with Gog and Magog. Because I go to the Qur'an first, and I study the subject in the Qur'an, and that makes me controversial. Did you hear that?
Yeah, I heard that.
Did you hear that?
I heard.
Because I go to the Qur'an first. I show my respect for the Qur'an. I bow my head in submission to absolute truth in the Qur'an. That makes me controversial. That makes me controversial.
I think the controversy is probably not the best word. I think what I always say is, even if we disagree on a particular point with a scholar on a matter, which you are entitled to do, the fact that there is a scholarly discourse that raises the bar for thinking on a particular topic should be entertained and open. But if we shut out every kind of scholarly discourse and interpretation, we shut out the possibility of testing our own version of the truth.
Whenever I give my opinion on any subject, I am always careful to declare this is my opinion. And I urge my listening audience or viewing audience, do not accept my opinion. Don't do that unless and until you are convinced that I am correct. Otherwise, I'm going to leaving behind me when I die, I leave parrots who will simply mechanically repeat everything. My teacher, Maulana Fadlur Rahman Ansari, rahimahullah, did not train me that way. But Sarfraz, you have to excuse me. I have a brilliant student in Manchester, Deobandi. And he studied in a Darul Uloom. I did not. I studied at the Alima Institute of Islamic Studies. And I was astonished. This Deobandi graduate of a Darul Uloom becomes my student and very much attached to me. And after listening to me, this is what he said to me. He said, Shaykh, in the Darul Uloom, we are taught not to think. And if you think, you could be expelled. I was astonished. I was astonished when I heard that. If this is correct, then this explains the fact that they consider knowledge to be a package which is sealed. And all that they have to do in the Darul Uloom is to transfer that package from one generation to another. There is no need to think. There's no such thing as independent thinking. There is no such thing as critical thinking. But Allah sent the Qur'an to people who think. And because I use that when studying the Qur'an on Gog and Magog, that is what caused me to be now demonized as controversial.
Shaykh, but your efforts, inshallah, they won't go in vain. I think there are many people that are listening, and I've come from the Darul Uloom, and in my experience in the Darul Uloom, I appreciate that, I have teachers that have given me the ability to question, and sometimes they didn't like me to question certain things. And but I think they encouraged the ability in me to be able to say that, look, you cannot just regurgitate what we are giving you. Take what we are giving you and think about it. They may not have been like that always, and there are many things which I agree. You have to just regurgitate. You have to pass on and pass on and pass on. But the ability to think is and I think we do that as a community because we lack confidence, which we once had in the golden age of Islam. We lack the ability to be able to be analytical and critical and to be real searchers of the truth. And if you do that, you are not shy and ashamed of being able to test your version of the truth.
Did your Darul Uloom ever take up the subject of marriage with a 6-year-old?
They did not.
They did not.
I think I was too young. I think I was 6 years old when I came across. But they didn't take that up. But
this hadith is in not only conflict with the Qur'an, it is in conflict with elementary common sense and with moral integrity.
But I do believe, for example, on that topic, when they gave me, what I have now is the ability to be able to look at the hadith and say, look, I don't understand this, and the many opinions I've read and understood about it is that the narrator of the hadith got the age incorrect. And I'm willing to accept that. I've listened to an entire scholar from Birmingham. Many people may not agree with the scholar, but I was willing to listen to understand that his opinion was he did a talk on Sahih Bukhari, saying that there are certain errors in Sahih Bukhari, and I'm willing to listen. I don't just shut that out. I'm willing to listen. I'm willing to understand and test my version of the truth. But I want to come back to Yajuj and Majuj, Shaykh. And I think our community, there's so much that have not been explained on Yajuj and Majuj that that everything we say to them will be like news. So from Yajuj and Majuj, people have interpretations. Oh, they're going to be like this. Oh, the wall is the Great Wall of China. Oh, it is this wall, is that wall. Shaykh, do we understand the wall that was built by Dhul Qurnayn to be figurative or literal?
I have only pity in my heart for foolish people who disrespect the Qur'an. If you want to study the Qur'an of Gog and Magog or Yajuj and Majuj, I have said it and I'm repeating it, show respect for the Qur'an. The Qur'an has spoken about Gog and Magog or Yajuj and Majuj. So why don't you begin your study with the Qur'an before you shoot your arrows in this direction and that? Offering all kinds of wild opinions when you have not as yet studied the Qur'an. It's rather foolish. And when you study the Qur'an, then, only then do you go to the Hadith. And if a Hadith even appears to be in conflict with the Qur'an, you must always remain with the Qur'an. Yes. When you go to the Qur'an, it becomes so simple because there are only two verses which make mention of Yajuj and Majuj by name. Although there are other verses connected with Yajuj and Majuj, but they're not mentioned by name. And you have to think to recognize it, okay? Yes. And this is not a radio program where we can elaborate on that subject. It takes some time. But I do have a book on Gog and Magog, which I wrote, maybe 20 years ago. And since then, so much more knowledge Allah has blessed me with. Probably I need to bring out another edition of that book. But I have lectured on the subject and lots of times over the last 25 years. At the beginning, when I started to lecture on Yajuj and Majuj in New York in the 90s, they said I was crazy. They shut the doors of the masjid on me. Even to this day, they're shutting the doors of right here in Cape Town, they're shutting the doors of the masjid on me. Because my views are so different from what they consider to be the traditional viewpoint. That Gog and Magog, according to them, are some funny creatures living in the interior of the earth, which qualifies as rubbish. And I have to use strong language to wake people up. And Gog and Magog will not come into the world. The world will not experience Gog and Magog until after Nabi Isa alayhi salam, Jesus, the son of Mary, has returned. And he has not as yet returned. I don't think even in Cape Town people are recognizing that he has already returned. No. He is not as yet returned, and therefore there's nothing happening in the world today which is in any way connected with Gog and Magog. That is the traditional view. That is the view based on Hadith, a misinterpretation of Hadith. So when I come and I study the Qur'an and I offer a different view, my condemnation now is, Imran is controversial. Well, I tell them, you go your way. And let me go mine. I don't have time for you anymore. I'm sorry, Mawlana Nasr, I have worked long enough. I have toiled long enough. I have done enough work to try to wake them up. And they're refusing to wake up. When you go to the Qur'an, there are only two verses. One, which mention them by name. One is in Surah Al-Kahf. And that one in Surah Al-Kahf indicates, number one, that they are human beings, not some funny creatures living in the interior of the earth. That's rubbish. Number two, that they have power, such power that even Zulkarnain could not destroy them. Number 3, that they commit fasad. And fasad is an act of corruption to such an extent that it can destroy. Number 4, that Zulkarnain contained them and therefore rendered them harmless by building a barrier made of blocks of iron and coated with copper. But Zulkarnain is someone who impacts on history twice. Don't tell me Zulkarnain is someone with 2 horns, because that is false. The Qur'an never refers to Zulkarnain as someone with 2 horns. The Qur'an always refers to Qarn as a generation, a people, an epoch.
Yes.
And so Zulkarnain is someone who impacts on history twice. And therefore, Maulana Sarfraz, this is elementary analysis. The fact that he's called Zulkarnain indicates that there will be two events in history, not one, in which Gog and Magog will be contained. The first already occurred, and it's mentioned in the Qur'an, and the second one has not as yet occurred. The Qur'an also, in that same verse in the Qur'an, informs us when the first event of Gog and Magog was to occur, power manifested itself in the region of the Black Sea, Ainun Hamia, the Black Sea. And power was used to punish the oppressor. Power rested on the foundations of faith. Don't leave me. Try to remember what I'm saying. So when the second of Qarnain, the second Qarn of Qarnain is to occur, all of this is from the Quran. Yes. When the second Qarn of Qarnain is to occur, power will once again manifest itself in the region of the Black Sea. And this will not be like the Soviet Union, an atheist state. This will not be the Ottoman Empire, an oppressor state. This will be power resting on foundations of faith, manifesting itself in the region of the Black Sea. And this power will resist the oppressor and eventually challenge the oppressor and defeat the oppressor and contain the oppressor. That's where we are now in history. But my analysis is rejected, all right, completely rejected by traditional scholarship. What can I do? Answer. The answer, Sarfraz, is this. If my analysis and my explanation of the Quran is correct, I don't have to bother about the critics, because this will survive. The second reference to the Quran, in the Quran on Gog and Magog, is in Surah Al-Anbiya. And that one is just as spectacular, that Allah destroyed a town. He expelled the people of the town. He banned their return to that town to ever reclaim it as their own, until Gog and Magog are released, and then they will spread out with their indestructible power all over the world. And then something will happen only once in history. They will take control of power in the world. And these are evil people. These are godless people. These are oppressors. And they will bring these people back to that town. Okay? Which town is it? I have used my proper methodology. Go to Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and he'll tell you that Allah will destroy Gog and Magog in Jerusalem. So I am on safe foundation when I say the town in Surah Al-Anbiya is Jerusalem. My teacher also had that view. Dr. Iqbal also had that view. I'm not alone. And so what the Quran is telling us is that Allah destroyed Jerusalem, expelled the Jews, banned their return. For 2,000 years, they could not return. And then Gog and Magog emerged, and they spread out all over the world. They took control of power in the world. And Gog and Magog brought the Jews back to Jerusalem to reclaim it as their own. And therefore, Gog and Magog have to be those who control power in modern Western civilization. And Maulana Sarfraz, I am correct. So the critics can say what they want. It makes no difference to me.
Shaykh, I would love to go on, and I think the listeners are listening to this and they're thinking, I want to hear more, but I want to say to you that please go and get a copy of Shaykh Imran Nazar Hosein's book. Read it, understand it, go through the Qur'an, learn for yourself, and follow him on his tour where he's going around. You will learn much more about it. It's so gripping and so important. And I want to mention two things before we end. I know we've come to the end of our show. The first thing I want to mention is that those of you who are listening to the radio don't have the privilege that I have to sit in front of Shaykh and to see an 84-year-old man rattle off the 10 signs that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned without sitting with a piece of paper or a book from memory at 84, to be able to know those signs, not even counting on his fingers. I've been watching him. He knows them like that. So that's impressive, Shaykh. MashaAllah. May Allah bless you with your ability to continue benefiting our communities, inshallah. The second topic is that I just want to make an announcement that inshallah on Saturday, the 18th, at 2:30 at the Islamia Auditorium, Shaykh will be in conversation with Dr. Ozli, who is an assistant professor at the International Islamic University of Malaysia, specialising in nationalism, Islam and the Muslim communities in the post-Ottoman Europe. And that will happen at 2:30 in conjunction with the MSA Union. MSA of UWC will be hosting that. So please, those who are able to listen in or to attend, please do attend that at 2:30 on Saturday, inshallah. Shaykh Imran Hossein will be in conversation. I know I've gone over my time a little bit, Shaykh. Please do accept my apologies, and to the radio also accept my apologies. Jazakallah, Shaykh.